707. I'm Daedalus Howell. We're talking with Esther Lemus. You know her from the school board in the Windsor Unified School District. God, I've been having so many people from Windsor lately, and it's town of Windsor, not the city of Windsor, so it's the town of Windsor's Unified School District, am I right?
Yes.
And you're running for re-election this year.
Yes, that's correct.
Because you were appointed. Why did they appoint you?
Well, there was a school board member who stepped down.
Okay.
And so they they took in applications. There were 6 candidates. It was a public interview.
Yeah.
And I believe I was chosen because of my passion and commitment to students.
Right.
I do a lot of work with youth. In my current position with the DA's office, I'm involved with our prevention programs, and so I teach programs in the schools. And I have always been an advocate for children, so I believe that came through during my interview.
Yeah.
And so I was chosen, and it's been a great experience since I've been appointed.
And you have this really interesting career where you are at the intersection of law and education, right? And so you do a lot of educating of kids in terms of gun violence prevention. One of the things you did recently, you mentioned at Santa Rosa High School. Were you planning to be an educator? Did you know this was going to be part of your career? You know,
it's funny. Sometimes you just fall into a path, and it just somehow happens because of just different life events and community events, and you just end up on a path. Interestingly, as I was driving here thinking about this interview, I remembered that when I was in high school, I started a club in high school, and it was promoting higher education. So I have always been an advocate for education, higher education, and I've always been one to encourage students to really, students and people to really pursue their dreams.
And yet, you ended up in the district attorney's office. How did you get there?
You know, it's interesting because, I do a lot of speaking with kids of all ages at schools throughout Sonoma County. Mm-hmm. And I like to share a story about me when I was a kid.
Okay.
I would say probably 4 or 5 years old, and I'm the youngest of 5 daughters. And so back then we didn't have car seats or any of that, right? And
right.
Young kids could sit in the front seat.
I remember sitting in the back of pickup trucks.
Right.
Yeah. Those are the days. Yeah,
exactly. So back then I always had to sit in the back, right? And I would ask my parents, why do I always have to sit in the back? And they would say, because you're the youngest. And my response was, it's not my fault I was born last. And so I share that with kids as an example of really my commitment to justice and social justice has always been there since I was literally a child.
You know what fairness is.
Right, fairness, exactly,
right.
exactly. And so, that really is something that's driven me in my life. Mm-hmm. My passion for justice, social justice, and making sure that things are fair for everyone. And so DA's office, getting into criminal work, again, one of those things, I just kind of fell into it, which is interesting. I was after law school, I was working for a private law firm. Mm-hmm. And at this firm, they really highly valued attorneys who came from the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Interesting.
And because they came with trial experience, because at the U.S. Attorney's Office, you got a lot of trial experience. So I heard about an opening. A friend of mine told me, hey, there's an opening here. And I thought it would be something that could further my career. So I applied, and I ended up...
As an attorney.
As an attorney,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So I applied, I ended up at the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco. And I loved it. I loved it because I realized that I could really do justice and what I thought was fair in each case. Taking into consideration the facts of each and every case, I could consider a person's, the offender or the defendant's, criminal history or lack of criminal history in resolving the case. And so the fact that I had that discretion to do what I thought was fair in each and every case was something that I really valued, having the privilege of being able to do that. And again, it was aligned with my pursuit and passion for justice.
And so you're able to create justice or manifest justice and impact somebody's life directly on a micro level, but now you're doing it at a macro level.
Right.
Which is interesting, right? Especially in the context of schools, right? As a school board member, and I know you're running for re-election, but it seems like school is an inherently, not to knock schools, but there's a disequilibrium often. And I think that fairness as a concept is so abstracted that what is fair in school? It seems people are coming into what is supposed to be an equal environment with either deficits or issues or privileges that not all students have.
Right.
How do you mitigate that?
Well, I think really that's the privilege of serving in this position, is that you're able to look at the inequities in the education system, and you're really able to put supports where they're needed.
Okay.
So for example, if you have a group or subgroup within the school that's really underperforming, you're able to really take a close look at that and ask the questions, what's going on here and what can we do to allow this group to improve and to allow them to have success like every other student. So that's, when I joined the school board, it really opened up my eyes to a whole other world.
Yeah.
And I realized that I have the ability to do justice in the school system as well.
And in some ways, do preventative justice. So 10 years down the road, you're not seeing your kids in the DA's office, right?
Right. And it's interesting because there were many reasons that I applied for the appointment in the first place, but what I saw in the DA's office was part of what helped put me on this path. Mm-hmm. Because in the DA's office, right now I work with the adults, but I have worked in the juvenile system as well, working with minors.
Oh, wow.
And so I have seen, obviously you see the impacts of children falling through the cracks, mm-hmm. children not having the right supports in place. And in adult court, you're able to see the long-term impacts
right.
of what happens when kids fall into this system and what can happen if there isn't any intervention along the way. And so that's part of what drives me too. I have seen what can happen, and I want kids to be successful. I want every child to have an equal chance at success in life, and I'm willing to do whatever I can to make sure that they have that opportunity.
Do you feel you've had some success stories in your first year here on the school district?
On
the board?
On the school board.
Yeah.
We have, in the time that I've been on the board.
I know it's been brief.
Right,
but, yeah.
which was February 2015. Yes, I can tell you that I'm very proud to say that we recently we're in the process of implementing a new program. It's called the Big Picture Learning Program. We have an alternative education program at the Windsor Unified School District. It's called Windsor Oaks.
Okay.
And historically, Windsor Oaks has, I think children, sometimes students, when they go there, usually they're lacking in credits. And I think in some ways, some kids don't feel a sense of pride when they go to Windsor Oaks. So we have actually
Is that because it's identified as a sort of alternative
exactly.
or disciplinary situation?
Right,
okay.
right. And so we have implemented a new program to rebrand the school. And it's called the Big Picture Learning Program. And this is a program that provides individualized curriculum for the students based on their interest. Because again, at the end of the day, we want these kids to be successful. We want
right.
every student to succeed, regardless of whether it may be struggling along the way. And so far the reports that we're hearing back, very positive. Attendance is up. Students have a lot of pride in their new school and program. And really, overall, it's just a very positive thing. That's
great. We're talking with Esther Lemus. She's running for re-election onto the Windsor Unified School District School Board. This is 707. We'll be right back. It's 707. We're talking with Esther Lemus. She's running for re-election on the Windsor Unified School District School Board. We left off talking about the successes you guys have already been able to manifest in your short term, and now you're facing re-election. What are your plans for the future with what you're doing on the board?
That's a great question, and I can tell it's hard to narrow it down because I have so many plans, and that's the beauty of it. I'm so excited. I'm so excited about the future, and I'm excited about all that can be done. I can share with you some of my priorities. One of my priorities is increasing college and career readiness for all students. Mm-hmm. I want to see more students take the A through G requirements and be prepared to apply to college come senior year. Really, my goal is, again, I want to increase those numbers. I want students to be fully prepared to apply to college, and at the end of the day, have it be their choice, whether or not they go to college. Of course, we would want to encourage more students to go to college.
Right.
But I want students to have that option. I don't want them to reach senior year where they're deficient in certain classes and can't apply at that point. So increasing college and career readiness is one of my priorities. Another priority that I have is closing the achievement gap. There does exist an achievement gap between the various ethnic groups, and I can tell you that it's really more aligned with socioeconomic background of students. I mean, that really does affect student performance.
It's more about the economic drivers, not the ethnic drivers.
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely. And so that's something that I want to examine more closely and see what we can do to close that gap. The other thing is, and this is related to the achievement gap, we have seen numbers, and I can tell you that our English language learners, those who are learning English, and economically disadvantaged students are not performing as well as the rest of the student population. And really my philosophy is I want every child to have a shot at success in life, and I don't want any student to be left behind. And so that's also another priority of mine, is making sure that we put supports in place so that these students can succeed and really have a chance and opportunity at long-term success.
You've been successful. What was it during your school days that helped you get along?
It's interesting because, and I like to share this with students when I go out and speak to students at different schools. In my home, neither of my parents had a formal education.
Okay.
So both of my parents and my grandparents, they were migrant laborers. So they immigrated to this country from Mexico. And my mother was the child of migrant farm laborers who moved around from town to town and switched tons of schools every year. My dad also worked in the fields for a period of time, and so they didn't really have the opportunity to get a formal education. They got some education, but they didn't have the opportunity to really go very far with their formal education. One thing, though, is that my parents always emphasized and valued education in our home, even though they couldn't always help us. Meaning, especially once I got into some of the more advanced math classes in middle school and high school, they weren't always able to help. But they were always there to encourage and to really to motivate. And at the end of the day, there was so much value in education. They praised us so much when we came home with good grades. So of course, when you receive that praise, it's going to motivate you to want to continue to do well. My mom used to, that we grew up Southwest Santa Rosa, spent a lot of time in the Rosen area. And if we got A's, we would be rewarded with a banana split from Foster Freeze. I believe it's still there.
Yeah, it is. And there's 5 of you guys all together.
Yes.
And so were you in an academic household at that point? Did you feel like that education was valued to that? Were you competitive with your sisters?
Education was valued, and all of my sisters, we all have our own talents. And I had one sister, there's 5 of us, one sister who was the first in our family to go away to college. And her name is Rachel. And so, fortunately for her, a counselor changed her life and in turn changed our entire family's life. She met a counselor. My sister was a great student, from elementary school all the way through high school, straight A student, taking all the, honors, academic classes, college prep classes.
Sure, yeah.
She met this counselor, and the counselor said, so what are your plans after high school? Do you plan to go to college? Even though we valued education, it was a foreign concept to us because my parents hadn't gone to college.
So the next step was sort of blurry. You couldn't
it
see
was blurry, yeah. It was foreign territory for us. So this counselor told her, my sister said, I'm probably going to get a job after high school. And the counselor said, no, look at these grades. You're college material. You need to go to college. So this counselor really helped my sister, kind of walked her through the process, demystified the application process. So my sister went off to college. And that happened when I was entering 7th grade.
Okay.
And so at that point, really it's the perfect time, for a student to start thinking about the future. And so at that point, I had this really strong role model. And for me, I wanted to be just like her. Yeah. And at that point, I knew I was going away to college too, and there was no question about it in my mind.
And so that counselor's input, it seems to have had a ripple effect through all of you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful, and really I think that speaks to the value of teachers, counselors, educators, and just positive role models in our lives. People can change not just individuals, but entire families. And this counselor really changed the course of my family's life, because I really believe that education lifts up not just the individual, but the entire family and generations that follow.
Let's talk about your individual experience. Where did you go to college?
I went to UC Berkeley.
Right on. Yeah.
Go Bears.
Yeah. I was just there the other day. Yeah.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Yeah. And then grad school also there, or?
I went to law school, at UCLA.
Sorry. Yeah, that's
UCLA
great.
School of Law.
Yeah. I mean, these are prestigious universities. Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I'm very proud of both schools. I loved my UC Berkeley experience. Law school is tough no matter where you go. And depending on where you go, it's not always the fun experience, but certainly you learn a lot and it prepares you for your future.
And what brought you back to Sonoma County?
I was away cultivating and putting my career in place after I graduated from law school, and met my husband in Los Angeles. Eventually we got married. I had my daughter when I was in Southern California, and I realized that I wanted her to grow up near family.
Yeah.
I didn't want her to be a stranger to, I grew up with a very large family here in Sonoma County. Tons of cousins, tons of aunts, uncles everywhere. And it was such a beautiful experience, and I did not want her to miss out on that.
Yeah, Los Angeles, for as densely populated as it can be very isolating, I found.
Right, yeah.
So you came back up here, and then eventually you learned about the job at the DA's office.
Yes.
Got in there.
Yes.
And then the school board, right? We're truncating a lot of
Yes.
Right. So that was then. What's next? What are you looking at 5 years down the road here? 10 years?
And that's a great question. I'm a person who always I live my life always open to opportunity. And that's really how I have ended up where I am, because I'm always, if I see an opportunity, I usually, I like to take advantage of it. And, I learned about the DA's office opening, I applied. I learned about the school board opening when I first was appointed, I applied. And so in terms of, specifically what I plan to do, number one, I want to continue serving students.
Right.
I'm a person who's always been, I grew up really committed to serving my community and doing whatever I can to lift up the community and leave it a better place. So wherever I end up, I know that I will be working for the betterment of our community. I'm really open to all possibilities, really.
We're talking with Esther Lemus. She's running for re-election on the school board of the Windsor Unified School District. We'll be right back. We're back on 707. I'm Daedalus Howell. We're talking with Esther Lemus. She's running for re-election to the Board of Education for the Windsor Unified School District. We've talked a little bit in the past segments about your work with gang violence prevention or gun violence prevention, I would imagine, in association, at least in part with gangs here in Santa Rosa. Are gangs inevitable? Are they just a phenomena that we're going to have to accept happening, or is there a day where gangs aren't serving the kids the way they do?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you asked, are they inevitable? They've been in existence for a long time. It's funny because sometimes, we read in the news about some of the gangs that exist in this day and age, right? Norteños, Sureños, or other gangs, depending on the region.
Yeah. And then you realize so that multi-generational, go back 50 years.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because I teach a gang prevention class at schools, and we have a true and false portion of the class. And one of the questions is exactly that: gangs are a new thing, true or false, right? And the truth is that gangs have been in existence for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right.
They've just it depends on the region, and they're different groups and different types of gangs.
Is it just a tick in the human makeup where we just get together like that and cause mayhem? I mean, it just seems endemic. Like we've always done this. Are gangs just a kind of tribalism?
And that's a good question.
Maybe not the right question for this
context.
Right. But okay, so given the obvious momentum gangs have had through the centuries, and in recent decades, at least in Sonoma County, what can we do? How do you go into a school and try to stop the velocity of history, you know?
Well, you know, I can tell you what I'm doing right now, and this is actually something that I'm teaching in partnership with Santa Rosa Police Department. We have a program called the Gang Resistance Education and Training Program, which we teach. There's an elementary curriculum and a middle school curriculum. And so really this class focuses on many topics. Anger management is one. There's a discussion on bullying. And so really it's important to have these conversations with kids. It's important to also to focus on kids when they're young, because you know, we have found, I'm also involved with the Violence Prevention Partnership, which works with gang prevention as well. And we have found that a lot of times when kids become gang involved, it's at about 12, 13, which is still
early?
young.
Wow.
It's still young, right? So, you know, so we go into the schools. You know, the importance of having also the police officers there is it's the positive. You have a
see them as
relationship building, and but again, we talk to children about healthy choices or healthy decisions, good decisions, and we also are very real with them. Talk to them about the consequences of poor decisions and what can happen. So, you know, I oftentimes share with them some of my experiences growing up. I mean, I had some of my peers when I was growing up make some poor choices and end up in the criminal justice system, some spending close to 20 years in prison.
Wow.
And so I like to share that with them because I want them students to realize that really one poor decision can really, really change your life.
And it doesn't have to be a dramatic decision too. It could be a small decision that incrementally contributes.
Exactly. Yeah, and we talk about that. We talk about, you know, you think you're having, you know, you're playing around with your friends, where, oh, let's go and steal something from the store, right? You get arrested. Well, that, you know, you now have that on your rap sheet, and you know, you continue to accrue these. It's really not good for your future.
How deep does the outreach go? I mean, you can reach the kids. Do you ever engage their parents in this sort of preventative or resistance sort of style training?
You know, and that's actually an important question. And I can tell you that I actually went to this. It was a gang prevention seminar that was put on through Gang Prevention Awareness Week through the city of Santa Rosa.
Right.
And this was over a year ago, and they had a really good PowerPoint that was very informative about gangs and gang sign symbols, paraphernalia. And so I approached some of the presenters with Santa Rosa Police Department, and I asked them, because I recognized that there was a void in our community with programs for parents about gang awareness. And so I approached them. I said, hey, have you guys thought about presenting this to parents? And so that conversation led to 1 year later, we actually presented for the first time as part of Gang Prevention Awareness Week. We presented gang awareness training for parents in Spanish.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so we actually taught it. We had a little subcommittee that met, and we chose a location that we thought would be easy for parents to go to. We also talked about it. We had a representative from California Parenting Institute, and we talked about who are the referrals, who are the parents who are coming, who have children that are gang involved or at risk of being gang involved. And we learned in these conversations that a lot of these were Hispanic parents who spoke Spanish. And so we decided as a group to present the entire program in Spanish. And this was a partnership between District Attorney's Office, Santa Rosa Police Department, California Parenting Institute, some representatives from the Rosa schools. And so we had our first ever gang prevention training for parents in Spanish, and it was a successful event. We had tons of parents there, and now we have people wanting more and wanting us to go to other parts of the city. So to answer your question, I know
No,
a long
huge,
answer,
yeah.
but yes, we are now starting to reach out to parents. We recognized a need, and we have moved forward with that.
So in the context of the schools, right, is this a program you'd like to bring to the Windsor School District or any permutation of it?
Yes. In fact, I actually made contact with the school resource officer at Windsor High, Deputy Fletcher, and I invited him. I said, hey, Willie, I know him well. Hey, Willie, can you come out? We're having this training, and I would love to duplicate this. and bring it to Windsor. So he came and watched the entire presentation, and because it was in Spanish, there was English translation, so he listened with the headset. But yes, my plan is to bring that to Windsor.
Now, Windsor obviously doesn't have as evident a gang situation as Santa Rosa. I would imagine this would be an effort to prevent it from ever getting near the
Right.
issues we face here in
Right,
the city.
and I can tell you that in my work through the juvenile system, a lot of times you have parents who come in who really, truly don't know how to recognize gang involvement.
Yeah, what are the signifiers? Like, what are some things parents should look out for?
Well, colors is
Right.
one. A lot of certain
If
colors.
you see a certain color,
Right,
they're
right.
probably trying to indicate something.
Right,
Okay,
right.
yeah.
And there's some specific graffiti that's gang related. There's some, I know, for example, and I've learned a lot through these trainings as well. I know sometimes certain gangs will incorporate a sports team to kind of be more, I guess, to try to disguise gang involvement.
see, right.
But they'll take certain colors from certain gangs. So it appears as though it's just a sports team hat.
And yet,
Yet
yeah.
the majority of their group that's gang involved are using this particular
They've
team.
appropriated it, and it's
Right,
this
right.
loaded thing. Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so what do you do in a situation where you've isolated a group of kids who could do better in school, and you realize the issue is they don't have any money at home, right? And that's creating a situation where they come to school, they're hungry, or they're worried, or their housing is insecure. How do you address issues like that when you're just on a school board? You can't give them money? What can you do?
You know what? And that's a great question. That's a great question.
We'll find out, right?
Right.
yeah.
Right. And right now in our community, we're having a lot of dialogue about the homelessness, and there's a real need there, especially with the rising cost of housing.
We have 1,000 students at the JC who are homeless.
Right.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Right. And really, if there are homeless students, we will put the supports in place.
Right. You just have to figure out a way to identify who they are, because
Right.
oftentimes there's going to be like issues of shame and that kind of thing where they don't want to share that information about their,
Right,
their
right.
situation.
Yeah, but certainly that's a challenging situation, and I welcome these conversations as a board member because I want the issues to be presented to me so that we can have these conversations and figure out how we can, again, put systems in place so that every student can have success, even those who have greater struggles, like students who are homeless.
Well, they're very lucky to have you. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming, Esther.
Thank you
Come
so
back.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're talking with Esther Lemus. She is running for re-election on the Windsor School District, Unified School District School Board. I'm Daedalus Howell. Thank you for watching.